They say the sharpest knife is not hung in the kitchen, but lies right in the hands of a loved one. I believe that because it was my son, together with his wife, who hid that knife behind sweet smiles, waiting for the moment to stab me in the back. And the most painful part, they even used my little granddaughter as bait. Before I tell the rest of the truth, if you are listening, please hit subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're watching from. Every bit of support from you is the strength that lets me keep telling the stories many want to bury. The greatest happiness of old age, they say, is sitting and watching your children and grandchildren gathered around the table, hearing the happy laughter in a house full of light, seeing those innocent eyes shine like little stars. I believed that for 72 years, until one spring afternoon in Oregon, when a whisper from my 9-year-old granddaughter flattened my whole world. That day the sky was crystal clear, the old pines along the town whispered in the wind, and the drive up to my son David's suburban mansion was carpeted with fallen cherry blossoms like a pale pink rug. I drove my old sedan into the yard, my heart light with joy because it was Emily's birthday, my only grandchild. The house was bright, children's music played, and the smell of grilled meat drifted through the backyard. Kids laughed, and adults held glasses of wine while chatting. That scene should have filled an old grandfather's heart with happiness. But fate has its own way of turning seemingly sweet moments into cuts that never heal. I stepped inside, and just as I caught the scent of freshly baked cake, Julia, my daughter-in-law, ran out to greet me. Her face was carefully made up, her smile bright as a flash, and she exclaimed, "Father Gregory, it's wonderful that you're here. This party wouldn't be complete without you." I froze for a moment. Over the years, Julia rarely gave me more than a few thin greetings, and yet today her voice was as sweet as honey. I smiled politely and handed her a shiny silver-wrapped box with the architectural Lego set Emily had long wanted. Before I could make it into the living room, a pink-dressed blur came running down the stairs. Emily, my granddaughter, her golden hair shining in the afternoon light, her little shoes clicking across the wooden floor. "Grandpa, you're here." She threw herself into my arms, her innocence melting my heart. I bent down and kissed her head, which smelled of kids' shampoo, handed over the gift, and watched her eager eyes tear the paper open. Inside was a Lego statue of Liberty Model, and her eyes lit up, sparkling as if a tiny flame burned within. "Thank you, Grandpa. It's perfect," Emily shouted. But then in an instant that smile faded and her eyes dropped. She glanced at David and Julia, who were laughing with guests, then forced out another line to me. "It's really wonderful, sir." I heard the tremor in her voice, something an outsider would surely miss. I used to run a construction company, sign hundreds of contracts, and negotiate with all sorts of people. With just a look or a hesitation, I could read the truth beneath the surface. And in Emily, I sensed something was wrong. But I swallowed that unease and sat at the table with a few familiar neighbors, lifting the glass of red wine Julia had just poured. The birthday party went on cheerfully, but I noticed David constantly glancing at his watch, while Julia circled like an actor tending her role, praising me in front of guests. "Mr. Gregory is still so sharp, still the pillar of the family. We are lucky to have such a wonderful father." I smiled faintly, sipped my wine, and wondered when my presence had turned into a subject of flattery used as a publicity ploy. Then suddenly Emily tugged my sleeve. Her tiny voice trembled, each word like a dagger. "Grandpa, after tonight, Mom and Dad will take all of your money. I heard they said they will do it right after the party." I was stunned. The music, the laughter, the lights, everything became a distant silence. My heart pounded. My hands shook so much the wine in my glass rippled. I looked at the small face before me, blue eyes rimmed with tears, shoulders trembling. I bent down and smoothed her hair, whispering, "Don't worry, Emily. I'm here. No one will take anything." She nodded and quickly ran off to join the other children, leaving me standing in the bright room. But a flood of questions spun through my head. Part of me wanted to believe her right away, because Emily never lies. But another part forced me to stay calm. Children can mishear or misunderstand adult conversations. I could not convict my son and daughter-in-law on a few whispered words. I had to observe and verify. And more than anyone, I knew how to keep silent, so as not to give others an opening to exploit. I raised my glass, smiled at a guest who approached to talk, hiding the hand that still trembled. In my heart, I thought, if there really is a plot, they will reveal themselves tonight. After Emily whispered that warning in my ear, my mind buzzed like 1,000 disturbed bees. I sat back at the table, holding my wine with no sense of the usual bitter taste, my throat dry. Around me, familiar faces still laughed, and plates of cakes were passed. But my thoughts drifted back to the years after Ellen, my wife, passed away. 3 years had passed since then, and I still remember her hand growing cold in mine in that hospital room, heavy with the smell of disinfectant. Ellen had lived her life devoted to the family, and before she closed her eyes, she looked straight at me and said weakly but firmly, "Greg, take care of Emily, but watch David. He's weak and easily led." At the time, I brushed it off as worry. After all, David was family, and I believed love could cover weakness. But now her words echoed from afar, replaying in my head, along with Emily's frightened whisper. I recalled the sums I had spent over the past 3 years, amounts that even surprised me when I added them up. In the first month after the funeral, David came to me with red-rimmed eyes, saying his house in Eugene was about to be foreclosed. I immediately wrote a check for $40,000, thinking it a gift to help his small family stay afloat. 2 months later, Julia called, voice trembling. "Dad, David's car has a transmission problem. We need it fixed to get to work every day. We don't know how to manage." I paid another $8,500 to the garage and received a strained hug and a brief, thankful smile. Then when Emily entered a private school, Julia insisted our child needed a better environment with tuition over $22,000 a year. I paid without hesitation because in Emily's clear eyes, I saw Ellen's reflection, a future worthy of care. But the expenses kept piling up. Advance for a leaking roof repair, $6,000. Investment in a friend's project, $15,000. Urgent medical issue, $12,000. Each time I opened my wallet, a small voice inside me said I was being used, but I ignored it for the sake of family. Then one day I checked my accounts and froze. $152,000 had left my account over 3 years, most of it flowing into David and Julia's pockets. And now Emily had just whispered they would take whatever remained. I sighed and remembered an afternoon just a few weeks earlier when Julia had stopped by my house, holding a cup of tea, but her eyes were scanning every corner of my kitchen, living room, and staircase. She blurted, "Father Gregory, this house is too big for you alone." There are many quality nursing homes. You would have nothing to worry about and people to take care of you. I smiled awkwardly and changed the subject, but a cold feeling rose in me. At the time, I thought it was merely thoughtlessness. But now, piecing that remark together with Emily's words, the picture looked far more frightening. I glanced around the table and saw Julia, laughing loudly, pouring more wine for guests, her smile wide enough to reveal calculation. David seemed more strained, occasionally glancing toward me but quickly looking away, as if afraid to meet my gaze. I took a deep breath and reminded myself, no conclusions yet. Maybe Emily misunderstood. Maybe Julia was speaking casually, but maybe everything is true. I needed more evidence to see exactly what they wanted. A lifetime in business taught me that before making a decision, you must test the foundation, and the foundation of the truth before me was shaking. I remembered the times David asked for money, how Julia would deftly tack on reasons for Emily. making it impossible to refuse. Could all of this be a long-term plan to bleed me dry? Until the day they took it all? I took another sip of wine, but today its bitterness was different. The bitterness of suspicion, of betrayal not yet formed. I glanced at Emily. She was still playing with her friends, but would occasionally steal looks at me, her worry far beyond her 9 years. I nodded to her slightly, a silent message. I heard you, and I will find out the truth. That night, after the party ended, I sat in my car with my hand on the steering wheel, not starting the engine. Yellow streetlights cast down across the windshield and picked out the deep wrinkles on my face. I thought of Ellen, of her warning to watch David, of the sums that had flowed like an endless stream. I whispered into the darkness, Ellen, perhaps you were right, but I need certainty. I will not let suspicion turn into a crack unless I have proof. And I knew from that day on that every word and every gesture from David and Julia would be under my watchful eye. Because if they truly were plotting, I, Gregory Hale, would not let myself become easy prey. The next morning, Oregon sunlight poured through the living room windows, shining on the oak shelf where I kept the faded wedding photo of Ellen and me. I sat there, sipping thick coffee, trying to shake off the chaotic aftertaste of yesterday's birthday party. Emily's whisper kept echoing in my head, mingling with memories of the money that had gone, and Julia's calculating look. I told myself to stay clear-headed. I could not accuse anyone yet, only watch. And strangely, only when I began to pay attention did I see signs that had been there all along. At 9 o'clock in the morning, I went out to water Ellen's roses. As I bent down to check the root, the iron gate creaked, and I looked up. Dorothy, the neighbor who had lived across the street for more than 20 years, waved with a paper bag from the bookstore. Greg, I ran into David and Julia downtown last week, she said casually. They looked serious, carrying a thick folder of papers from the bank. They must be doing some important paperwork. I was jolted, but outwardly I only nodded. Bank? Papers? David had never mentioned anything to me. I smiled politely, hiding the shock. After Dorothy left, I stood long by the rose bushes, fitting the new pieces into place. Bank, paperwork, and Emily's after-the-party whisper. The picture grew clearer. At noon, I pretended to call David and invited him to lunch, but his voice was awkward. Dad, I'm busy with work, maybe another day. Julia's voice answered behind him. Tell him to do it tomorrow. Today's not convenient. I stayed silent for a moment and said a brief goodbye. Though my heart raced, I could not remember the last time David had refused lunch so bluntly. That afternoon, while driving past the shopping district, I happened to see David exiting the First National Bank. He carried a black leather briefcase, and Julia was beside him whispering something, and they hurried toward the parking lot. I stopped at the corner and watched, a stone settling in my chest. I had seen my son at banks before, but this haste and furtiveness were different. That evening, sitting in my study, the landline rang. It was David. His voice sounded strained. Dad, are you free tomorrow? We have a few things to discuss, family matters, nothing big. I asked. What do you need to talk about in private? David hesitated and circled it. Just a long-term plan for everyone, so you won't worry later. Long-term plan sounded like a bell in my head. I heard the tremor in his voice, the same as when he used to take money from Ellen's wallet to buy candy and then lie about it. But now what he hid might not be a few small bills, but the whole business I had built my life on. After that call, I sat for hours in the dark, listening to the clock tick. On the desk, the old files of Hale and Sons still bore the traces of 40 years of sweat and tears. Every dollar and every brick that made up this estate, I had thought, would be a firm support for my descendants. Yet now my own blood might be plotting to seize it by paperwork and seals. I remembered Emily's whisper. After the party, Mom and Dad will take Grandpa's money. Clearly, yesterday, David had tried to keep me after the guests left to discuss family matters. That child's line now had real pieces to back it up. A bank, secret files, David's evasive words over the phone. I stood, drew the curtains, and looked out. The Oregon night was quiet, except for the pines' whisper. If they were setting a legal trap to bind me, then I, Gregory Hale, would set a different, more cunning, tighter trap for them. That night, when the house was still, I sat alone in the study before the safe that had not been opened for years. My hand paused a moment, then I decisively turned the familiar combination 3 times. Ellen's birth date. The lock clicked open softly, like a memory I'd kept hidden. Inside were stacks of thick folders, old contracts, bank receipts, savings books, and envelopes of receipts I had kept as a professional habit. I spread everything on the desk, arranged the piles, and began to audit. At first, I only intended to check recent items, but the more I sifted, the clearer the pattern. The small amounts at the start, $5,000, $8,000, then gradually larger sums, even $40,000 at a time. Each had a plausible reason: saving a house, fixing a car, school fees, and medical bills. But placed side by side, they formed a steady slope, like a graph someone had drawn to practice my tolerance. I remembered David's eyes when he asked for money, embarrassed, yet expectant, and Julia's tone, always tacking on the phrase, "For Emily's sake, Dad." I shivered. This was no longer an isolated incident, but a calculated process. They had grown accustomed to my reaching for my wallet, to my never asking questions. Now that Emily had overheard, I saw that the after-the-party plan was the final step: sign the papers and hand over control. I took a pencil and made a ledger on yellow paper: date, amount, reason, and who requested it. I marked places where Julia was the active party, and the numbers were plain. In 3 years, more than $150,000 had left following a single trajectory. I am no lawyer, but I know that with a spreadsheet and all the invoices, messages, and saved emails, I could build a file thick enough for any court to see that I was not mentally diminished. Rather, I had been emotionally exploited. I sat in silence, looking at those dry numbers that in my eyes turned into widening cracks in the family foundation. A life in construction taught me, when you see a crack, either fix it immediately, or it will bring the whole house down. I nodded to Ellen's photo on the desk and whispered, "You warned me to be careful. Now I will not just be careful, I will strike back." I put the ledger in a separate folder, locked it, and wrote in my personal notebook, "Tomorrow, begin collecting evidence, find allies." From that day on, I would no longer be the gentle old father they could manipulate. I shifted from suspicion to certainty, from passive to active. If David and Julia truly believed I was weak enough to sign without reading, they would soon learn that Gregory Hale still had the wits to turn their game into a trap. On Sunday morning, just after I had poured my coffee, the doorbell rang. Opening it, I found Julia holding a basket of steaming croissants, smiling as if nothing had fractured between us. "Father Gregory, I baked some croissants this morning and brought them for you," she said, her sweetness designed to charm. I invited her in, set the tray on the glass table, and watched her closely. She sat, and her eyes scanned the room like she was taking inventory, then gently said, "You live alone. You must be busy. David and I have been thinking of ways to spare you small chores." The line was a soft net, but in her eyes I saw urgency. When David came in, he was different from yesterday. No hesitant mumbles, but an assertive demeanor. "Dad, we're here to talk seriously today." "There are things we need to get done before matters get messy," he said. I kept calm and asked, "What things?" David glanced at Julia and then recited lines clearly rehearsed. "We've prepared paperwork for you. Some financial management things, a power of attorney. So if you forget anything, we can handle it." Julia pulled a leather folder from her bag and placed it on the table like a professional banker, revealing the title, Power of Attorney. I feigned ignorance. Power of... what does that mean? Julia answered softly. It's an authorization, Dad. You sign and we'll pay your bills, handle medical care and all the tedious procedures. You don't need to worry about anything. David pushed, more urgently. Dad, remember last week you left your car key at the supermarket? All Saturday you were locked out, and you missed that doctor's appointment and only remembered in the afternoon. We just want to care for you. These things keep happening. Who will look after you if something happens? Those true small incidents, keys, missed appointments, lent plausibility to their pitch. Julia sighed and took my hand. We've had a lawyer prepare it, and a notary is ready to come to the house. You only need to sign, so everything is clear and safe. It was the perfect ploy. Mix a real fear with legal authority to coerce an old man. But inside, I felt a cold smile spreading. I had seen such staging in boardrooms, where an opponent wanted me to sign an unfair contract. They applied time pressure, small evidence, then slipped in a pre-drafted document to rush a signature. I remembered Ellen's warning. Always ask and read carefully. Don't let anyone get your signature with pity. Now they thought a few small mishaps would make me nod. I picked up the papers and flipped through a few pages, seeing blunt clauses. Authority to manage all financial assets. Agent may act without court oversight. That essentially handed over nearly all power. I set the folder down slowly, eyes fixed on David, and spoke in a silk-smooth voice. I understand your point. I also have things to check. I'm tired today and need to rest. Tomorrow we'll sit down and I'll read every page. In that moment, I did not say that because I believed them, but because I needed time. Julia looked briefly disappointed, and David urged, Just one signature, Dad. I smiled faintly. Tomorrow. They left with smile that carried heavy shoulders. As the door closed, I opened the folder they had forgotten. I had deliberately let them go, thinking there was still a chance. In that file, the most interesting thing was the gap they had not foreseen. A POA, however cloaked in legal language, still requires the principal to sign voluntarily and lucidly. Furthermore, notarization requires proper witnesses. They prepared a notary, but failed to account for the fact that the notary could become a risky witness when I turned the tables. I put the documents in a separate drawer, locked them, and wrote on the notebook cover, Note, POA, check lawyer. Contact Samuel at the bank. Call Karen the notary. Invite as observer. In my mind, the board had moved from the living room to the study. They believed they could force my signature. I knew they had arranged notarization to make it look legal. But I also knew that with the history of payments, their messages requesting money, and with two professional witnesses I would call, a former bank vice president and an independent notary, I could reverse everything. Julia and David left, thinking they had half a victory, unaware they had provoked a game. The old man they had underestimated would play to the end to protect what cannot be measured in money, the future of my only grandchild, whom I will never let fall into the hands of the greedy. That morning I didn't make coffee as usual, but set the long wooden table in the living room. On it I neatly arranged 3 folders, a statement of the more than $150,000 paid out to David and Julia, a copy of the power of attorney they tried to force me to sign, and finally the draft of the old will, the one only I knew about. The doorbell rang. Karen Davis stepped in, leather briefcase in hand, with the sharp gaze of a seasoned notary. Right after that, Samuel, the deputy director of First National Bank, arrived, adjusted his tie, and shook my hand. Gregory, I'm here exactly as agreed. What are we going to witness today? I only smiled and answered briefly, a lesson. At 10 o'clock sharp, David and Julia walked in. Julia flashed a bright smile, clutching a leather-bound file. Dad, today we can finish everything. As long as you sign, it will all be a weight off. David looked at me, his eyes both impatient and anxious. I invited them to sit, then slowly slid the POA toward the middle of the table. You call this taking care of Dad, but Karen is here, she can confirm. A power of attorney means all of Dad's financial and medical control will fall into your hands. Is that correct, Karen? Karen nodded, her voice even. Exactly. And the prerequisite is that the signer must be completely voluntary and lucid. Julia blinked and forced a smile. But Dad is lucid and healthy. We just want to help. Samuel cleared his throat and set the real bank documents on the table. But last week, you two asked me how to initiate an emergency guardianship. That's only used when someone lacks capacity. Why would you need that if you truly only want to help? David dropped his head and couldn't say a word. Julia's face changed, and she muttered, "We were just looking into it." I looked straight at both of them, not raising my voice, but each word cold as a knife. Looking into it? Over 3 years, I have paid more than $150,000 for your tuition, car repairs, and keeping the house. I didn't hesitate, because I thought it was my responsibility. But in return, this is how you repay me. I paused, my eyes drilling into David. My son, do you know, before this, I intended to leave most of the estate to you, for you to be the next pillar. But after today, I have to reconsider. Very seriously, the air thickened. Julia turned pale, and David looked up, eyes terrified. Dad, what are you saying? I answered briefly, I haven't decided, but one thing is certain. The will not be the same. I stood, closed the files, and looked at them. You should go. This is a chance to reflect. If there is one more time, I won't stop at a warning. Julia clenched her lips, but didn't dare argue. David pulled his wife's hand, and, awkwardly, they stood. When the door closed, I sat down, looked up at Ellen's photo on the wall, and whispered, I have planted fear in them, but in my heart I still hope. They will stop and look at themselves. If any family is feeling left, perhaps they will change. And if they truly can, that would be the greatest gift for Emily. That night, David's house stayed lit unusually late. After dinner, Emily had been taken upstairs, her bedroom door closed, only the nightlight spilling through the crack. In the downstairs living room, Julia sat with arms folded, her face tense, while David paced, eyes red with pressure. Don't you see? Dad has changed, David whispered, his voice shaking. He said directly he'll reconsider the will. If he rewrites all of it, we'll have nothing. And you know the situation. The mortgage is 3 months overdue. Credit cards owe more than $40,000, and last year's hospital bill is still hanging. If Dad cuts us off, we will be officially bankrupt. Julia ground her teeth, the wine glass trembling in her hand. No, we cannot let that happen. All these years, you and I have lived on that support. If he cuts it off, this whole house collapses. What about Emily? David dropped into a chair and buried his face in his hands. I know, but Dad is right. The amount is too much already. Maybe it's time we take care of ourselves? Julia snapped, each word like a shot. Take care of ourselves. With this mountain of debt, do you think your salary's enough? You think I can handle Emily's tuition with a part-time job? Don't be naive, David. This is the time to fight to keep what should be ours. David was silent, his hands trembling. Julia leaned in, whispering, her voice icy. You need to wake up, David. His only weakness isn't money. It's Emily. David jerked his head up, stunned. What? What are you talking about? Julia took a sip of wine, her eyes glinting cold. If he won't let us take care of him, then he also won't get to be close to Emily. Think about it. Just transfer her to a faraway boarding school, and he won't be able to visit often. Then we can gradually plant, in her mind, a different image. A grandfather who is selfish, greedy, keeping his wealth for himself. David panicked. Julia, she's our daughter. You can't turn Emily into a tool. Julia shot him a knife-like look. That child is our future. If he won't sign and leave things to us, then at least we must make him understand that the right to see his granddaughter is not something he can have just because he wants it. Put him in a position where he must choose. Don't you see? This is the only way for us to get out of this debt." In that moment, David felt torn in two. On one side, fear and the scrap of conscience left. On the other, his wife's cold pressure and the prospect of losing everything crushed by debt. He sighed, his voice breaking. I'm not sure." Julia put a hand on his shoulder and pressed down. "You don't need to be sure. Just listen to me. Let me handle it." Upstairs, Emily turned in her sleep, hugging her old doll. She had no idea that right beneath her feet, her parents were drawing up a cruel plan, turning the very love her grandfather had for her into chains. On Saturday morning, the phone rang. David's voice came through, unsteady, but trying to stay calm. "Dad, could you come over today? Julia and I want to discuss more about family matters." I heard Julia's irritated whisper behind him. Then David hurried to add, "Also about Emily's schooling." "You will want to hear it?" I sat silently for a moment, my eyes on Ellen's photo above the fireplace. A bad feeling rose in me, but for Emily's sake, I nodded. "All right. I'll come after lunch." In the afternoon, I drove over. The two-story house was brightly lit, but there was no sound of children. Strange. Emily would usually run out to hug me in the yard, but this time, when the door opened, only Julia stood there. She smiled, but the smile was forced and sharp as a blade. "Father Gregory, please come in. Emily is upstairs getting ready for the new school week. There are many changes to discuss." I stepped into the living room. On the wooden table, there were no cakes or tea as usual, only a pristine stack of papers, with a pen laid neatly beside it. David sat there with his head down, hands clenched together. Julia began, "Dad, the other day you really disappointed us. We only wanted to take care of you, and yet you brought outsiders in to humiliate us. Do you know, if you rewrite the will, we will have nothing to raise Emily or keep this house? Do you want to see this family fall apart?" I took a deep breath and kept my voice calm. "Julia, I only want everything to be clear. I have given you a chance to change." "There is still time," Julia leaned forward, her voice icy. "No, time is up. The mortgage, credit cards, and medical bills are choking us every day, and if you really reconsider the will, it means you are pushing this whole family off a cliff. But we will not let that happen." David looked up, worry in his eyes. "Julia," she cut him off, hissing through her teeth. "Father Gregory, your only weakness isn't money. It's Emily. The child loves you, yes. But if necessary, we will move her to a boarding school in Seattle. Once she is far from you, seeing her will be difficult. And then we will tell her a different story, that her grandfather is selfish, greedy, and doesn't want to leave anything to his grandchildren." I was stunned. Those words were like a knife in my heart. I looked at David, hoping to see an objection, but he stayed silent, his lips trembling without a sound. "You two," my voice caught, "you plan to use Emily herself to force me?" Julia was indifferent. "Not force, but the truth. You have to choose. Either sign this so we can take care of you, or accept that your granddaughter will think her grandfather is nothing but a miser." I looked toward the staircase, where Emily's small room still cast a nightlight glow through the door crack. Imagining that innocent face stained by lies made my heart twist. All the years of building, all the pain of losing Ellen, I could bear it. But losing Emily, losing that pure love, I could not. I swallowed hard and nodded slightly. "I understand. Give me time. At an upcoming occasion, when the whole family and all the relatives are present, I will sign and hand things over. But Emily is not going anywhere. Never use her as a condition again." Julia's lips briefly curved, a flash of triumph in her eyes. David sighed as if a burden had lifted. I stood, stepped to the door, hiding the tears rising in my eyes, feeling my legs heavy as lead. Outwardly, I had agreed. In Julia and David's eyes, I had truly yielded, and I felt that perhaps I had lost this game. In the days after that tense conversation, the atmosphere in the family changed noticeably. Julia moved about more lightly, her voice sweet, but full of the confidence of a victor. David stopped frowning with worry and even called me in a rare, cheerful tone. Dad, I'm very grateful to you. I'll prepare that day carefully. The whole family will see everything fall into place. News of the handover spread quickly. Within a few days, relatives near and far all received invitations. Everyone was eager to attend, treating it like a family milestone. The following Saturday, my villa blazed with lights. On the long table draped in white cloth, crystal glasses were neatly lined up, and my wedding photo with Ellen was placed solemnly by the fireplace as a reminder of the family's origin. Guests arrived in clusters, chatting animatedly. The atmosphere was no different from a celebration. Julia appeared in a striking red dress, lips sharply painted, shaking each person's hand with a radiant smile. Today is important. From now on, Father Gregory won't have to worry about anything. We will shoulder it. All David walked beside his wife, suit crisp, face relaxed. The constant anxiety had vanished, replaced by the confidence of a son certain he was about to be entrusted with responsibility. In a corner of the room, Karen, the notary, was present with her thick leather ledger. Beside her, Samuel, the deputy director of First National Bank, sat quietly, hand on a stack of documents, eyes steady. Their presence gave the gathering the air of a real legal signing. When I came down the stairs, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I gave a faint smile and spoke in a low, clear voice. Thank you all for coming. Today, as promised to David and Julia, I will sign the papers to hand things over, so the next generation can shoulder the burden. I believe that is the best way for our family to be at peace. Applause rose. Many nodded in approval. Julia drew a deep breath, her eyes blazing. David bowed his head slightly, his features easing, looking like a son finally recognized. I sat at the long table. David quickly set the file before me and opened it to the page needing a signature. A glossy blue ink pen lay neatly in place. Karen prepared her notary book. Samuel sat up straight, eyes on the page. Julia sat rigid, hands gripping the edge of the table, eyes locked on my hand. The room was pin-drop quiet, only the clock ticking. I picked up the pen. The tip touched the bold line, and this time I truly signed, my script clear and decisive. The whole room burst open. Julia smiled brilliantly. David let out a relieved breath. Many relatives nodded. So it's done. I closed the file gently, said nothing, then handed it to Karen. The notary opened it and read aloud, her voice carrying clearly through the room. The will and property authorization. State. All real estate, accounts, and income will be transferred into a trust dedicated to Emily Price, the only granddaughter of Mr. Gregory. And, the testator explicitly declares, management rights will never be handed over to son David and daughter-in-law Julia. The room went dead still. Astonished whispers spread everywhere. A few relatives blurted out, "What?" No transfer of management to David and Julia. Julia stood frozen, lips trembling, unable to speak. David stared at the papers, eyes utterly confused. Yes, I signed. But not to hand things to the greedy, to preserve the family's honor and the truth, I said. Relatives buzzed at once, whispers piling up across the room. No transfer? Then what did he just sign? What is going on? I rose slowly, sweeping the room with my gaze. For the first time in years, I saw that people were not looking at me with pity for an old man, but with respect and expectation. I took a deep breath and spoke firmly. Yes, I signed. But not to give to the greedy, to protect this family's honor, and so everyone will know the truth. I nodded to Samuel. He placed the thick bank file on the long table and opened it for all to see. Here is evidence from First National Bank. Only 2 weeks ago, David and Julia came to ask about emergency guardianship, a procedure used only when a person truly lacks capacity. They intended to turn their father into someone without rights so that all assets would fall into their hands. The murmurs surged like waves. Julia shouted, her voice breaking, "Don't believe him! It's all fabricated!" But Karen raised her notary ledger, her voice cold. "I recorded clearly. Days ago, these two tried to pressure Mr. Gregory into signing a comprehensive power of attorney, despite his resistance. He was fully lucid, and I noted signs of coercion." Julia stammered, trying to salvage, "No! This is just a misunderstanding. We only wanted to take care of him." I stepped forward and placed another stack of papers on the table. "And this is the truth. More than $152,000 in the past 3 years, from tuition, car repairs, medical bills, to investments. Every dollar I gave without regret, thinking it was to help my children. But in return, you prepared an entire legal script to turn your own father into someone senile." The room erupted with angry murmurs. Relatives' eyes turned on Julia with contempt, many shaking their heads in disappointment. I lifted my head high, fixing my gaze on David and Julia. "You thought I would quietly sign your trap. Number. Today, before family and law, I must make clear, in these past days you not only staged false documents, but even dared to use Emily, my little granddaughter, to threaten me. You said you would send her away, keep her from me. You threatened to fill her head with lies, to make me a greedy, selfish old man in her eyes. That is not a concern, it is a crime." I paused, then declared firmly, "That is why I signed today not to hand things to you, but to place all assets into a trust for Emily. The child will grow up in truth, not in the cruel lies you planned." At that moment, small footsteps sounded on the stairs. Emily clutched her doll, eyes wet, and spoke in a trembling but clear voice. "Grandpa is telling the truth. I heard Mom and Dad say they would take all his money." The entire room froze. Julia turned pale, and David collapsed into his chair, holding his head. Relatives exclaimed, "My God, even the child heard it. So heartless to do that to their own father?" I spread my arms and pulled Emily close, holding her shaking little body, then raised my head and said firmly, "This is why I did everything. Not for revenge, but to protect my granddaughter, and to remind this family, honor must never be traded away." Applause rang out, not of joy, but of agreement. In that moment, the farce ended. The betrayers were exposed, and Emily, my only grandchild, would grow up in the light of truth, not the shadows of lies. Julia collapsed. She lost all credibility. Friends and family turned away. Debts piled high. Credit cards seized, and the glittering doors she once flaunted closed, amid universal disdain. David was different. After the shock, he began to regret, admitting his fault. But the consequences remained, cut off from inheritance, left with only one chance, to change through actions, through honest work, to redeem himself to his daughter and to his father. Emily was protected. The trust had been established, enough to give her a secure future, safe from exploitation or threats to rob her of her innocent childhood. I, Gregory, looked across the murmuring room and spoke slowly. I did not do this for revenge. I did this so this family still has a chance to return to the truth. Honor, once lost, can be regained. But if grandchildren grow up in lies, that is the true permanent loss. I stopped, looking at David, then at Julia with her head bowed, my voice no longer harsh, but somber. "You think I'm satisfied today? Number. My heart aches, but this lesson was necessary, to teach you what it means to be human. Everyone has a dark side, but if they awaken, they can still return to the light. However wrong you have been, you are still my blood, Remember, today's fall is a lesson never to forget, and the earlier it is learned, the better. In that moment, the whole room was silent. I knew this wound would not heal quickly, but it would stand as a mark, a chapter never forgotten, forcing the greedy to awaken, and forcing this family to remember that honor must never be traded away. My story closes not with triumphant joy, but with a bitter truth. Even in family, greed can blind love. But I believe this lesson will teach David and Julia the meaning of limits. I do not wish them to fall forever. I only hope that one day they will find their way back to the light to become better people. If you find this story worth reflecting on, please leave a comment and hit subscribe. Your respect and support are the strength that allows me to continue revealing the truths many wish to hide.